This story begins in the 9th century, deep inside Norway, where a legendary Viking named Folki lived. If you've ever watched the Vikings TV series, the Folki shown there is completely different from the real historical Folki. In the show, he's portrayed as Ragnar's friend and boat builder, but in reality, nothing like that ever happened. The series creators changed history to make it more dramatic and entertaining. The real Folki was a daring navigator and explorer, something we learned from the Book of Settlements. At that time, Folki lived in Norway, where many northern settlers were searching for new lands. The population was increasing, the winters were unbearably cold, and the Vikings were constantly fighting among themselves. Bloodshed and raids were common. Folki had heard about a distant, untouched land, a place where no one lived, said to be lush and green, promising prosperity to anyone brave enough to reach it. Folki declared, "I will find that land," and began preparing for his great voyage. He gathered a group of experienced sailors, and in 868 AD, he set sail with his family, livestock, and supplies aboard 3 ships. Their journey began from Rogaland, Norway. Their first stop was the Shetland Islands, a common resting point for Viking explorers. But here, tragedy struck. Folki's daughter drowned near the island. This broke him deeply, so much that the expedition nearly came to an end. After staying there for a while to recover, Folki gathered his courage again and continued the voyage. They next reached the Faroe Islands, where they restocked their supplies. It was there that Folki took along 3 ravens to help him find the new land, and from then on, people began calling him Raven Folki. Now they were ready for the most dangerous part of the journey, sailing into the ruthless North Atlantic, searching for a land they weren't even sure existed. After passing the Faroe Islands, Folki released the first raven. The bird flew away and returned to the Faroe Islands, meaning there was no land nearby. Then he released the second raven, which flew for a while and came back to the ship. Again, a sign of empty ocean. Finally, he released the third raven, and this one flew northwest and never returned. Folki understood at once. Land was in that direction. He followed the bird's path, and after many long, grueling weeks at sea, they finally sighted a mysterious new land. They landed on the eastern side of the island. Folki was astonished. The land was just as described: beautiful mountains, lush green valleys, and abundant fish in the waters. The summers there were pleasant, and life seemed good. But when winter arrived, they were completely unprepared. The bitter cold killed all their animals, their food supplies ran out, and they had no idea how harsh the winters in this new land would be. Somehow, they survived the winter. When spring returned, the snow on the mountains began to melt, and Folki climbed a nearby mountain to survey the land. From the top, he saw that the land was covered in ice everywhere. Frustrated by the endless cold, Folki said, "This land shall be called Iceland." Although he spoke those words out of frustration, Folki later returned to Iceland and built a permanent settlement there. He spent the rest of his life in Iceland, living out his days in the land that he had discovered.
There was a Viking named Erik the Red who lived in Norway. His father was a very hot-tempered and unprincipled man. One day, Erik's father killed someone in Norway, and because of that, the entire family was banished from the country. They sailed westward, and in 960 AD, they reached Iceland. By that time, about 80 years had already passed since Folki first discovered Iceland. By now, most of the good lands were already taken, so Erik's family got a rather ordinary piece of land to live on and farm. Erik grew up in Iceland. He married Thorhild, and together they built their farmhouse and started a new life. But just like his father, Erik had a terrible temper. Wherever he went, trouble followed. He had ongoing disputes with his neighbors over property and grazing rights. One day, one of Erik's servants accidentally caused a landslide, which destroyed a neighbor's house. Being Vikings, the neighbor killed Erik's servant in revenge. When Erik found out, he killed that neighbor and another man who was with him. The local people held a meeting and decided that Erik should be banished from the town, so Erik and his family moved to another part of Iceland. There, while building his new home, Erik stored some unique wooden beams with another man for safekeeping. These beams had sandbags attached, which Erik's father had once brought from Norway and passed down to him. Erik told the man he'd collect them when his house was finished. When Erik later came back to get his beams, the man denied having them, saying, "Those beams are mine." In Viking culture, breaking a promise was considered a deep insult, practically a declaration of war. Furious at the betrayal, Erik gathered some men and launched a surprise attack on that man's farm. He got his beams back, but in the process, the man's 2 sons were killed. The community again gathered to judge the case. They ruled against Erik, saying he had killed them out of revenge, and sentenced him to 3 years of exile from Iceland. It was declared that if Erik was seen anywhere in Iceland during those 3 years, he should be killed on sight. However, his family was allowed to stay on their land. While in Iceland, Erik had once heard rumors about a land far to the west, a place where no one had ever set foot before. Now that he was exiled, he had the perfect 3-year window to go find it. Instead of returning to Norway or any familiar island, in 982 AD, Erik gathered a small crew and set sail from the western coast of Iceland, heading into the frozen, deadly waters of the North Atlantic. For weeks they sailed through the brutal cold, until finally Erik the Red spotted a distant piece of land. As they approached, they saw massive glaciers and snow-covered mountains all around. This was the second largest ice-covered region on Earth, after Antarctica.
Erik spent the next 3 years exploring and mapping this new land, its mountains, valleys, and coastlines. In one region, he found lush green meadows, where the summer weather was mild and there was plenty of wildlife, seals, fish, and birds. This place was perfect for Viking-style hunting and farming. When Erik's 3 years of exile ended, he returned to Iceland and told everyone about his amazing discovery, a new, rich land he had found to the west.